What's up everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Art Talks. Today we're talking about a big one, light. Light. Today we're talking about light. That's how it's pronounced, isn't it? Light. That's how you say it. It's tough to talk about light without going off on tangents about other subjects because they're all so linked. So I've done the best I can to kind of make the information as to the point as possible. Really just some core principles about how to think about light, ways to organize your thinking about light when you're trying to put stuff together or make sense of what you're seeing. And then we can get deeper into little areas of that and things that it's linked to in other videos. So we're going to have a little explanation with a little diagram, and then we're going to get into looking at various paintings and talking about actual examples. So strap on your art hat, your art belt, let's get to it. Okay, so to begin, just gonna start with a very simple explanation of how that works. This is a hypothetical scenario where we have a sphere that is receiving no light. The sphere would exist, but it would be in complete darkness, we wouldn't see anything. So, if we add ourselves a big old light source, bang, psh, psh, psh. Okay, so now we're gonna get all of this. What do we have here? What's happened to the sphere now that there's a light source affecting it? So, if we think of light as these beams or particles that are emitted from light sources, whenever they hit a surface, that object is going to absorb a certain amount of light and reflect a certain amount of light. So this is what we're looking at. We have this sphere on this plane here, light source coming in here, and it hits the sphere, and all of this doesn't get hit directly by the light. So that's the light coming in, doosh, just falling off there, falling off here. We have the point of the highest intensity of light, the highlight area, and then gradually as the object turns, it falls away from the light, so these values here are gradually going darker as it's receiving less light. And then it gets to the point right here, the terminator line, where the light source can no longer hit the object. So then you get this dark area that has no light hitting it. This half of the sphere, that's this right here, this is being lit by the light source directly. This is what we call direct light. So that's one type of light, direct light. So then a lot of this light that doesn't quite hit this object maybe shoots past here, shoots past here. As soon as it hits this object, this floor here, a bunch of it is going to bounce back off. Bounces off. And then if you imagine all the different rays coming through here, bouncing around, you're ending up with a lot of light in the atmosphere back here. And you know, that's going to have this effect on this shadow area here. It's going to get light, but not directly from the light source, from all this light bouncing around and filling in the shadows. So that's second type of light, bounce light. And also you can see here that this cast shadow, this area that's not really receiving light because it's being blocked by the object, it's lighter up here because the light is able to kind of bounce around and fill in some of that area with light despite it not receiving direct light. And the closer it gets to this kind of nuke here of the object, it has a really hard time getting into that area, so it gets darker as we get closer to this deep dark nuke of the shadow. It's hard to talk about light without talking about materials because the materials that objects are made of have such a big impact on how light reacts and how we then see those objects. But let's say this was made of glass, the way that light would move through it would be quite different. The light kind of hits it and gets kind of warped and sent off other ways through the object. And that type of light is called refracted light. Just to be aware of it, but we're not going to focus on refracted light just now. We're going to focus on direct light and bounce light. So now we're going to look at a bunch of paintings and talk about these simple things and why they have the effect they do on objects. Okay, so here's one of my paintings, and this one lets us talk about a couple things. So first of all, if we're trying to create a good sense of light, I think it's quite useful to think about these three things. So once you have your light source, what is the direction of that light source? That's going to affect how the light basically bounces around the scene, where your cast shadows are going to lie. Direction could mean much more linear light like this, or if you have like a lamp or something, the direction could be this kind of more global thing like this. So direction, thinking about the direction of your light. Second is the intensity. So we can get light from anything from like glowing algae, which is very, very dim, it doesn't give off much light, to the sun, which burn your eyes out if you look at it for too long. So the intensity of the light is going to affect how much light can bounce around in the scene. So if you're lighting something with the sun, like in middle of the day like this, anything it hits, there's still going to be a lot of light bouncing around, going other places. If it's really dim, it's not going to go that far. So if the sun's going like bang, and then if you have weak light, you're going to end up with even weaker light after, if that makes sense, the intensity of your light. And then there's temperature, which is kind of a whole thing. So for now, all we need to know is that lights can have different temperatures, and I'll talk about the ones that are going on here to make more sense of this idea of temperature. So these are three properties of a light that we can think of to help us make sense of our scene as we're trying to light it, and make sense of how to light the objects that are in the scene. So this stuff right here, the direction, intensity, temperature, these are all properties of the light. Now the other side of this is the materials that the light hits and their properties, because they have just as big a role in how we see the light as the light itself. And that again is a whole thing. You could make a whole video on material properties, but there's a couple different materials in here, so we can talk about the role they play as well. So I'm gonna tuck this away for a second, and let's start talking about what's actually going on here. So we have a very strong directional light coming in from the sun from back here behind this building somewhere, and it's coming through, bang, it hits this plane here, and then based on this cast shadow here that we have, all of this is not receiving that direct light. So with that happening over there, the same thing is happening over here at this building with this guy. So this guy's caught in the shadow, so he's not getting any direct light, but we can still see him, we can still make him out. What light is getting in there for us to make sense of his form, to be able to see his form? So we have a cool skylight, and it goes throughout the whole scene. It's lighting everything, but where you have areas like this of strong direct light, that effect of the cool skylight is not so obvious. But once that's removed, and that's one of the main things you have lighting an object, it becomes much more obvious. So the skylight comes in and gives us a cooler, softer light. So if you think of the particles lighting this compared to our direct light, if there was a big light right here that was going boo right into his back, there'd be a very harsh light point, you know, kind of here, and then some like big cast shadows, stuff like that. This is a much more diffused light where we're kind of getting soft gradations and stuff. So what we see of him, we're seeing more of any plane that faces the top. The more angled up any plane is towards the top, the more light it can easily receive. So for example, his shoulders right here are faced towards the sky, so they get a nice chunk of light right here. His hat, that top plane of his hat, this little bit of his coat where it flicks up a bit more, this top part of his jacket, all of those are more upwards facing planes, so they get a bit more of that cool skylight hitting him. What else is he being lit by? We also have a little bit of bounce light. Because this direct light is so strong, there's going to be a fair bit of bounce from it. We can see it here on the stairs. It's that there's light bouncing from this lit area into this shadow area, kind of slowly disappearing off until there's not enough to reach the back here. So with that in mind, light is bouncing up. I thought it would make sense that this little part of his hat here was able to receive some of that bounce light as it's facing, the plane is facing down the way, this light is bouncing up the way. It's just going to be not that hard for that bounce to hit him on this material here. So there's a bit of bounce there, and there's a little bit of green bounce in the shadow part of his hand as well. So he's got this cool skylight there, and then bounce coming in into the cool part of that hand. And the way that you figure that out is because of this thing earlier, the direction of the light, the intensity of the light, the temperature of the light. So all the objects that are on this man, this coat, this hat, whatever, his skin even, they're all not that reflective compared to this big chrome thing right here. So why does this look so different? They're all being lit by the same thing. So this big chrome thing here is basically 100% reflective. And at that point, things basically become a big mirror. So this part right here, this blue part, these little blue strips up top, that's the sky. All of this is the surrounding environment. It's the bushes. If you imagine behind this guy, out of frame, where we're standing, there's a bunch more bushes. That's what all this is that you can see here. And then here onwards is a reflection of the ground plane. So in hindsight, there's actually a couple things I would change here based on that. I feel like this area back here should have more of a warm reflection to kind of make sense of this area here. That's what's going on in that kind of area. And also the guy himself, I feel like he'd be some kind of warped reflection here like that. But you know, you learn all the time, you move on, you try better the next time. So that's the difference in how two objects lit by the same light source. We got the skylight coming in here, but this guy's very non-reflective, cloth type materials. This is a highly reflective material, and how differently they behave. So be aware of how reflective your materials are and what that means for how it will react to the light sources that you have on the object. Okay, next example, Joaquin Sorolla, Spanish painter, one of the all-time greats. Basically, there's just a couple things that are demonstrated really well here, so I'm just going to talk about it in this painting. So, again, if we're thinking about light in terms of direction, intensity, temperature, and whether we have direct light or bounce light, what do we see on this guy? Let's just focus on this guy and what's happening with him. So, this area here, this is all direct light. That's the parts of him that are getting hit directly by the sunlight, the strongest light in the painting. So because that's getting the most intense amount of light, there's more light bouncing and reflecting off those areas, so the values are higher. This black belt here is very non-reflective, but we can see a value change here to the shadow part. It is slightly brighter. It's just a different material, so it reacts differently to the light than this shirt does. So that's our direct light. Then we have the bounce light. There's light coming all the way down here, hitting the floor down here, and then poof, it's bouncing back up, and it's hitting any of these downwards facing planes again. So his hat, for example, this is getting a lot of that nice psh, 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 bounce light coming in. All of this area here, all these downwards facing planes in shadow are getting this nice bounce light back up from the ground. And then we have these upper planes that haven't managed to receive direct light. There's this chunk here, this part here, and kind of over here. So this area here is, as we can see, much cooler than these other areas of light. Why? Because it's not getting the direct light that's only coming in here, something's blocking it up top. It's not getting the bounce light because it's not facing the bottom planes where that's managing to bounce back up and hit some of these planes. So the only thing managing to hit this area is a cool fill light, skylight type thing. And that light is everywhere, but it's most obvious here because there's not this direct light or this bounce light also having an effect on the area. So then if we think back again to the example of the sphere right at the beginning, the same thing applies to cylinders. And what's his leg here? This leg here is a big old cylinder. And this light is coming in and we're getting this direct light here. Then we're getting that core shadow right here, the part where direct light isn't managing to hit this, but also the bounce light isn't getting to it. So we get the dark shadow down here, and then we got that bounce back into the trizer leg here. So look for the basic shapes within these more complicated looking objects. It's all just made out of the same simple geometry, cylinders, spheres, all that stuff. So one more thing I'd like to talk about is exposure. Basically the range of light that our eye can take information in from at one time. So you know, if you're in a dim room for quite a while and then someone turns a big light on and everyone gets temporarily blinded by the light going on, everything's kind of white, and then slowly your eyes adjust and you can see how you normally would in that room. That moment where your eye goes from the darkness to the light, it's adjusting the amount of light that it lets into the eye, and that changes where we best see information. So here I have two different kinds of images. There's these two up here and these two down here. Now, let's say this is the information that there is to be seen from the most subtle darks to the brightest brights. With our eyes, we can see a certain range of this spectrum at one time. So eyes are pretty good. We can see more than most cameras and stuff at one time, but it does get to the point where basically we have to clip the information and we no longer see the details within a certain range of light. So if we take these top ones, I think of it as, are the eyes exposed to the lights or the shadows? So with these two, the eyes, I would say, are exposed to the shadows. So let's write this quickly as the darkest and the lightest. To see this stuff down here, you're gonna have to let a lot more light in to the lens of your eye to be able to make sense of these details. As you do that, the information up here is gonna slowly get blown out, basically. So let's say our eyes are focused on this range here. Let's say this is the range that we can handle with our eyes, and that's what we're focused on. This range right here is gonna get blown out. So this range here of lights are these lights here. Notice how there's basically no information there. This is just kind of blown out white. but then within this area here that we're able to see, so her face is in the shadow here. This is not direct light, but we can see her face very clearly. There's a lot of information there, and that's because our eyes are exposed to handle that range of light. So if your eyes are exposed to the shadows are going to be much brighter. You're going to see more information in the shadows, but the lights are going to start to lose information and just kind of clip off to pure white. Same thing's happening here. So all of the direct lights, kind of this whole area here, all of these are pretty much, again, like crunched to just flat white. There's not really any information there. And then within the shadows, all of this, all of that and stuff, we can pick out the cool top light, these kind of warmer bounces, the different levels of depth that we've got going on here. So again, that's our eyes exposed to the shadows. So now these two bottom ones are the opposite. We have our eyes exposed to the light. So if we bring this back up, this time we've used the range that we have to focus our eyes on brighter lights. So our lens becomes smaller to let in less light, which helps us make more sense of the lights, but we lose information then in the darks. So now we're losing this dark half, and we're able to see this top half that we'd lost before more clearly. So here you can see this is a big shadow area here, big shadow area here. These are really flat areas. We're not really getting much information, but then this big area around it, these are all the lights, and there's a lot of information there that we can make out. So understanding exposure and how our eyes deal with light is really great for building up your understanding and control of image making. There's nothing to say you can't have information in both light and shadow. It's up to you to control that how you want. HDR photography and all those things, it can be done really well. Just keep exposure in mind when you're making your work, and it should help you make a bit more sense of where you want to put your information, stuff like that. So that is it for this episode. I hope there's something in there that helps you make more sense of light, maybe something to look further into, maybe how the eye works, look more into exposure if that's of interest to you, different types of light, maybe the refraction I touched on briefly. You know, light's not so scary, you know, there's a system to it, it's not magic, so we can make sense of it, we can control it, we just have to understand what's going on. So if you like this content that I'm making, please like, comment, share, all those social media. I want to make this content free and available for everybody. So the way that you can help me is by sharing this around, telling your friends, just making more people aware of this content so I can keep putting time into this and making this content for you guys. Another way you can help out, if you so choose, I'm now going to be putting all these videos on Gumroad for $1. They'll still be free and available to watch everywhere else. Completely optional. The links will be in the description. Until the next time, stay curious and have a great day.